Welcome to Higher Ground Living, practical tools for lasting change. I'm Tommy Bates. Join me as we explore relationships, faith, emotional health, and the simple strategies that can help you build a better life. Hi, folks. Thank you for tuning in. If you want to know more about me, feel free to visit my website, highergroundliving.net. But before I get started, let me say this podcast is not a substitute for therapy. If you need therapy, please reach out and find a good counselor. Get some recommendations from somebody you trust. So statistics show that almost 20% of people in America struggle with anxiety. It's really the largest mental health issue that's affecting people today, one of the most prevalent issues. I heard a comedian say that this generation of young people want to talk about their anxiety, that everybody has a diagnosis of anxiety, basically. And we just all have a different percentage. You know, my anxiety's at 5. What's yours? And the guy said, young people today don't want to fix anxiety. They just want, other people to know about it so they can kind of work around it. I don't necessarily believe that, but either way, I want to provide some help with that, with anxiety. And the stuff that works, that I'm going to share with you, works whether you're young or old. So when I'm talking with clients and trying to assess where they are in our first meeting, I explain to them that anxiety and depression can be thought of, like on a pendulum. One side with anxiety and the other side with depression. And my layman's example of it is this. Depression is like, I just don't want to get up. I don't want to do anything. I feel exhausted, unmotivated, without energy. Like I just can't do anything today. I can't adult today. But, anxiety, on the other hand, feels like I'm overwhelmed. That's the best word I can think of. Like the walls are closing in. Like everything's just too much. And I know there are a lot of other symptoms for both depression and anxiety, but those are kind of the main ones. And it just helps me kind of get a sense of what the client's feeling, what they're dealing with. I also know that untreated anxiety over time can become depression. You keep trying to push it down and deal with it, and it can kind of lead to depression over time. So it needs to be dealt with. And that's what we're going to try to do today. Anxiety can include panic attacks, not always, but my work usually includes trying to explore the causal factors, trying to figure out where it's coming from. We look at patterns, we look at triggers, identify and try to treat stuff that's been traumatic in their lives. And I'll go ahead and give you my definition of of trauma. It's usually a factor in anxiety, and we try to process it without getting to the core issues of this trauma. Then it just keeps happening. So the definition of trauma: trauma represents a situation where I had no control, or control was taken away from me. And in turn, that begets a desire for control in my life. Most of the time, people whom I've treated who have significant trauma, they usually develop some kind of issue with control. Control is kind of woven in. That theme of control is kind of woven into their life. It can be a form of OCD, it could be an eating disorder, agoraphobia, avoidance of things. People who go through trauma, they feel very uncomfortable when they don't have control, because lacking control makes them feel really uncomfortable, takes them back to that traumatic situation often. But, inevitably, life won't give me that control. I want control, but things happen in my life that I can't control. And that's where the anxiety comes in. I want control. Life won't give it to me. So what do we do about it? Like I said, we try to look at causal factors, try to process trauma, work on the client's self-worth, tap into their faith system and their family systems, try to look for strengths. I try to help clients with their thoughts. That's going to be something I hope to lay out for you in a coming episode, to help you with a mental plan, how to filter thoughts, how to question your thoughts when you're afraid, challenge those irrational beliefs. It's one of the things I try to do. But the practical part, the stuff that helps, I want to share with you my take over the last 20 years, the sources of anxiety. I believe they come from two places, and I hope you can kind of lock them into your brain. One area is called chronology. I've titled it chronology. And the other area is locus of control. So when we talk about chronology, think about it this way. It's either thinking too far backwards in the past or thinking too far forward. When I dwell on the past regrets, past trauma, when I'm dwelling on that old stuff too much, I feel anxious. And then when I'm worried about the future, what hasn't happened yet, the what ifs, guess what? I also feel, anxious when I think too far forward. So I try to help clients focus on the next 5 minutes. Recognize when you're dwelling too far backwards. You've probably heard the windshield's bigger than the rearview mirror for a reason. If you try to walk through life trying to get somewhere by only looking through the rearview mirror, using the rearview mirror to guide you, you're probably going to get nauseous. My granddad used to be a farmer, and he'd let me plow. And man, I loved looking behind the tractor when that deep plow was turning that dirt over perfectly. It was like a satisfying video. It was so cool to watch that dirt turn over. But guess what kind of row I'd plow when I was looking behind me? Be crooked. And my granddad would say, boy, stop looking behind you. Pick you out a tree. Then when I focus in front of me, I could plow a straight line. This fits our spiritual life too for those of us who are Christians. The past has already happened. If you believe in the forgiveness offered by Christ's sacrifice, you're forgiven. You can't go back and undo it. So dwelling too much on it's not going to help. And, glancing back every now and then, learning from your mistakes, that's helpful. Drawing strength from coming through hard times, looking back and seeing the things that you've gone through and realizing you're a survivor, that's okay. But when you grind on it too much, that doesn't help. So part of my plan in trying to help people cognitively is also to talk about shame versus guilt. And I'll mention it briefly here. Guilt is a teacher. Guilt's like Dr. Phil looking at me and going, how's that working for you, Tommy? Not too good. It teaches you, guilt does. And guilt is okay, but shame is another thing. Shame tells you you're weak, you're useless. You're never going to overcome this. And so I often try to help clients, distinguish between shame and guilt and listen less to the shame and, but allow yourself to learn from the guilt. So focusing too far forward, worrying about the what ifs, that's not helpful either. There's no sense in dwelling on something that hasn't happened yet and, suffering twice. Don't focus too much on the future. Jesus said each day has enough trouble of its own. And so stay in the 5-minute window. That's what I call it. That's the chronology part, if that makes sense. Thinking too far backwards and thinking too far forwards. And, you may have heard of grounding techniques. It just means using your senses to focus on now, focus on right now. It may sound crazy, but it works. Try it if you want to. If you find yourself grinding on something from the past or worrying about the what ifs, take a drink. Feel the cold or the warm going down your throat and into your belly. Take a bite of something. See where you taste the sweet on your tongue or the salty part on your tongue or in your mouth. Touch something smooth or rough. Listen to something soothing. Thousands of grounding techniques. And like I said, they may sound kooky, but when you focus on your senses, it will help you focus on now. That's the goal of all of it. To get you focused now instead of thinking too far backwards or forwards. There are also going to be thousands of grounding techniques listed on the coping strategies of my website, so I'll talk about that at the end of the podcast. But like I said, it helps me focus on now so that I'm not stuck in the past or the future, and it really does work. That's the chronology part that I want to make sure you understand about anxiety. But the other area of anxiety is in locus of control, and I'll explain that too. If you get time, or if you want to do this later on today, take a sheet of paper, blank sheet of paper, kind of landscape. Draw a line on the right side, just a line, and then on the left side, create a fist-sized circle, so about the size of your fist. On the top of the line to the right, write this phrase: things that are outside my circle. And then I encourage you to think about some of those things in your life you wish you could just wrestle to the ground, things you wish you could control. And it could be something simple as your husband snoring. It might be your dog peeing in the floor, kid not trying hard enough in school, parents being critical, whatever's going on in your life that you just wish. It might be big things. It might be financial pressures, the fact that you have financial difficulties, anything that you can't control. Things are so expensive nowadays, it might likely be financial. The list could be long, but all those things you wish you could, wrestle to the ground and take control of. But now let's work look over to the circle on the left side and think about what the things that you can control. And so inside of that circle or on top of it, write the things that are inside of my control. And the things that you can write, I'll give you some hints. You can feel free to, to write anything that you think is something you can control. But I typically start with things like my faith, my courage, the thoughts that I choose to dwell upon. I can write, giving my child consequences if I'm having trouble with my children, or putting the dog in the crate, getting a sleep study appointment for my snoring husband. It doesn't matter. Whatever you can do about this problem, put that inside your circle. Those are things that you can literally do, but you need to understand that things like the outcome of your children's choices, whether they're going to be successful or not, that is not up to you. You can do your part, but ultimately that's not up to you. And this is an exercise to help you identify those things that you can control and the things that you can't. But grinding on those things outside of your control is it's a huge trigger for anxiety. That's usually where anxiety resides. Those things outside of my health, having health problems, having a diagnosis of blank might be one of those things outside your control. But this concept, I need you to understand any energy that you expend outside of your circle is wasted. And if you want to be a better steward of your emotional resources, then you need to recognize when you're grinding on those things outside your control and learn how to divert your mind and your energy to things inside your circle. You've probably heard the serenity prayer. This goes along with it, in AA circles. God grant me the peace to accept the things I can't control, the courage, the strength to focus on the stuff inside my circle, and the wisdom to recognize what belongs where. The locus of control issue is huge. And, when you start fixing that problem, along with what your mind dwells on, you're going to see huge gains. You're going to see improvements when it comes to anxiety. It's very, very important. And so within anxiety, some people struggle with panic attacks. Maybe you've seen a little novelty toy. I use it in my practice called a Chinese finger trap. I don't know if you've ever heard of that, but it's basically a little piece of bamboo that's, woven in a way that is tapered. And so when you put your fingers into it and you try to pull, the more you try to pull, the more it traps you, the more it prevents your fingers from coming out. And it can kind of make you feel a little anxious, if you're using one of those and trying to pull your fingers out. That concept makes sense when it comes to panic attacks. What we typically do is we feel panicky, our brain goes into fight or flight, and then, when our brain's decided that we aren't safe, it starts increasing your blood sugar, your heart rate, your blood flow, cortisol, adrenaline, all that stuff starts flowing, and it kind of takes over, and it becomes kind of hard to stop. But, the more you struggle with it, the more you try to gain control of it and force it, it's kind of like that finger trap. It makes it worse, when it just kind of escalates the panic. And so what I try to help clients do is just sit with it a minute, recognize what's going on. Okay, I'm having a panic attack. It's just my brain, going into fight or flight. It's not something that's permanent. And I need to start telling my brain that I'm safe. It's kind of like you're saying to yourself, oh, I've seen this before. I've heard of this before. It's a panic attack. Or if it's not your first one, you can say, this isn't my first rodeo. I've had one of these before. I know what happens. I feel rough for a few minutes. I know it's eventually going to pass, and I know in your mind, you might be like, well, I can't be this calm when I'm having all this stuff happen, but I want to encourage you to try. You'd be surprised what your brain can do when you accept it, when you can, in the middle of that, recognize this is not going to be permanent. I've had this happen before. It's going to end at some point. Some people use a paper bag to breathe into. That kind of lowers your oxygen level a little bit. That can kind of increase the carbon dioxide and calm you down. Some people tell you to place your head to sit in a sitting position and place your head between your legs. That can kind of shift blood flow. And, there are lots of different ways that people try to deal with panic attacks. But for me, I want to help with the mental side of things. And the biggest thing that I've seen success with my clients in is called belly breathing. I'm going to do a couple of audio tracks in the near future for you to choose from. Like I do with my clients, I give them an option, either the ocean, if you want to do some guided imagery of being at the beach. If people like that, some people don't like the beach. They might want to try the mountains. So I'm going to do 2 different breathing exercise audio tracks for you that you can choose and try. And that'll help you both with, anxiety, with stress reduction. And, I'll give you one of each. So you can choose whether you want to go to the ocean or the mountains, or maybe both. It's up to you. But belly breathing, I'll explain that in that guided imagery. But basically, it's learning how to direct your air down low into your belly. And I will go through that exercise and explain it in detail on the audio track. But that can help us slow our breathing. What basically trying to work your way out of it a little at a time, just like a finger trap. How do you get out of a finger trap? You press your fingers together. You calmly kind of wiggle your fingers and work your way out of it. Just remember, when you think about a panic attack, if you really did stay in a panic attack for a long period of time, eventually you probably would pass out. And I know that may sound scary, but guess what happens when you pass out? It's just like if you tried to hold your breath indefinitely. You can't, end your life by holding your breath, because your brain it'll cause you to pass out, and then your autonomic system will take over. And then one way or another, just like with this panic attack, it's not going to last forever. So sometimes we can let fear get in our brain and make us feel worse about things. And I want to remind you that these things are temporary. They are a natural production of, the systems in your brain that happen when you're in fight or flight. And you can get out of them and you can overcome them. And I have seen many, many clients do that. When you learn to accept it and recognize that they're temporary, you can, and this is going to pass, and it's not going to be like this forever. It's the irrational side that you allow to take over that just makes it worse. So anyway, when it comes to anxiety, there's a mental side and a physical side. And the mental side is trying to tell yourself the truth. And I'm going to, like I said, cover in a different episode, I'm going to go through some cognitive techniques that I'll help you with your thinking. And we'll work on that in a future episode. But the physical side is what we call being either emotionally regulated or dysregulated. Basically, that's a fancy way to say you're either calm or you're tripping, to coin an 80s phrase. Or I know that doesn't sound very clinical, but somewhere in between. I'm either calm or I'm flipping out. And trust me when I tell you, calm is the way to be if you want to live longer. You may like feeling hyped up. You may have some kind of mood issue. You may have ADHD, and you may operate on a faster wavelength than other people do, and that may serve you and suit you in your life. And I'm not trying to ask a leopard to change his or her spots, but I want to say it's important for you to build some calm into your life. One way or another, if you want to avoid burnout, if you want to live a long, full life, it's important for you to learn how to build calm into your life and learn how to regulate yourself. So, like I said, pay attention to these breathing exercise, audio clips that I'm going to provide. Be looking for those to be released soon. And I hope you can practice some of that belly breathing and take advantage of those resources that I'm providing for free. So finally, I just want to say that anxiety can also have a great deal of spiritual implications. Asking yourself this question, am I safe in this world? Depending on your interpretation of Scripture or your beliefs about God, about His plan, about this marred world we live in, that can create a lot of worry when we walk outside our door. It has implications on what we believe about safety, about accidents, about crime, about our health, host of possible fears and worries in this life. And so no matter how deep your faith is, you can struggle with very real pressures, very real dangers that are around us. You might say, faith doesn't pay my rent. But I want to take a second to say wherever you fall on the, if you are a believer, wherever you fall on that Calvinism, Arminianism argument, that's kind of a hard word to say, you may feel that your entire life is either predestined or, in Arminianism, I'll try to say that 3 times, whether your life has not been decided yet. You may struggle with this idea of whether you're safe in this world, based on how you feel about predestination, about, free will and that everything isn't set yet. And that's a long debate. I'm not going to wade into that too much, but I will plug in this moment a brilliant pastor that I have met, Brian Johnson. His Curious Faith podcast on the Agape Baptist Church website can help answer a lot of those questions about, is God good? Am I safe? Can I trust him? You can click on that website for Agape Baptist Church and click on media, and you can check out his podcast. I would encourage you to do that. He's got a lot of questions that are being answered in a very deep and meaningful way. But I believe that since Adam ate the fruit, since sin entered the world and marred it, I know, like myself and others, I have asked that question: am I safe? This world is twisted and jacked up. Am I safe out there? But I believe since God's perfect plan, with Eden was destroyed by the failure that we had, I know that people can ask that question. Can I trust God to keep bad things from happening to me? And these deep spiritual questions are often ones that we ask ourselves a lot. And maybe you don't think about that thing very much, but I think they're very important. To find answers to those questions. Am I safe? It has a lot of implications when it comes to anxiety. Maybe you haven't thought about that. Maybe you don't have time. You're too busy out there trying to survive. But, finding answers to that can have very real implications when it comes to your anxiety. Am I safe? I'm on this episode, I'm going to kind of give you a little bit of my own synopsis. Now, only had one semester at seminary, but I have studied the Bible for a long time, and I'm just going to share my interpretation. So I would encourage you to search for yourself. I'm not necessarily I'm an authority on relationship and counseling issues, but not necessarily an authority on theological answers. But I'm going to give you my take. This is my podcast, and I'm going to share my little take on it. It's okay if you don't agree. That's fine. But I believe God created the garden, and he wanted us to have a perfect, sinless existence. But he also didn't want robots worshiping him. I don't want my wife to love me because she signed a marriage certificate. I wanted to have a choice. And I believe that's why God gave us free will to make decisions on our own. He wanted us to love him freely. And so, I ask questions sometimes to clients, do you believe we have free will or not? So what did we do with that freedom that God gave us? We took that freedom and we chose to screw up. When Adam ate the apple, sin entered the world, and, things happened as a result of that are outside of God's ideal plan. So I think things can happen in our lives that God would not have wanted because of the nature of this fallen world. Autism, dementia, schizophrenia, death, cancer, murder, on and on and on and on. I don't think God wanted this to be our experience, but free will and sin changed all that. But what you have to remember is that God works in the middle of those bad things that happen to us. He uses them to shape us. He works out those things for our good. I've questioned so often that, is God good? Why does he allow these terrible things? Well, some things happen that he didn't want, I believe. But he takes those hard things and he shapes us through them. He works out those things for good. All these bad things that happen so often, there are ancillary things going on in the midst of all of that to help us, to help other people. So I believe, yes, hard things, scary things, sad things happen to us, but God is in the middle of them to sustain us, to carry us through them. And I can trust God to take those things and what I call Romans 8:28 them, which is a scripture that says, that we know that in all things God works together for the good of those who love him and are called according to his purpose. So he can take those horrible things that happen to us that we never would have wanted and bring about good in spite of those horrible circumstances. And the extent to which I trust that God can do that can make a difference in whether I'm crippled with fear or whether I feel peace. Everybody in some part of their lives is going to feel anxiety, but it can really be helped with prayer, with a deep relationship with God, and surrounding yourself with real Christians. So think about those things. I'm not saying if you have enough faith, you'll never feel anxious, but I'm just saying that faith can help alleviate it. And it's worth settling some of these questions in your heart about whether you're safe in this world and whether you can truly believe that there's eternal life after death. Don't be afraid to seek answers to these questions. They can make a real difference, in your journey with anxiety. Like I said, there are a lot of spiritual implications involved in anxiety. So let me give you a little recap real quick. Today, we talked about the causes of anxiety. We talked about the mental side of it, including chronology and locus of control, dwelling too much on the past, worrying about the future too much. We talked a little about panic attacks and how to, operate and work through them mentally. Recognizing times with locus of control, that you're grinding on things that are outside of your control too much. And, we talked about the need to seek answers to what you believe about feeling safe in this world. And I hope you can, answer those questions for yourself and, reach out for some help to get answers on those questions. So I want to say thank you very much for listening to Stuff That Works. Please check out Higher Ground Living for resources and watch for the upcoming podcast episodes. You should see some audio resources called Chilling at the Beach and Chilling in the Mountains. Those for some guided breathing exercises that, they've helped a lot of people in my practice over the years. And so if today's episode helped you, share with a friend and join me next time for Higher Ground Living, Practical Tools for Lasting Change.